Hey guys, it's James here. I wanted to make a video today about one of the clips I saw recently by Yuval Noah Harari. For some of you that know him, he wrote the book called Sapiens, as well as Homo Deus and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Now, I'll play the clip shortly, but what really stands out to me is that he calls Bitcoin a currency of distrust, which I kind of agree with, but his take on it is quite different. He describes it as a bad thing in the sense that you don't trust central banks and governments to create as much money as they like. And he hopes that in the future, we allow central banks and governments to create more money to create more trust in society.
The central idea of Bitcoin is basically electronic gold, that we don't trust the banks, the governments, so we don't want to give them the ability to create as much money as they like. So we create this Bitcoin. It's a currency of distrust. I do think that the future belongs to electronic money, but what we've seen over the last centuries is that it's actually a good idea to give banks and governments the ability to create more and more money in order to build more trust within society.
So throughout history, where we've had various different forms of money, there's been really good reason not to entirely place all of your trust in central banks and governments and whoever controls the money. So, for example, back in the 6th century BC in Turkey, the coins used to be made of electrum, which is a natural alloy of gold and silver that can be found in the ground. Over time, as the Romans invaded Turkey and took over, they melted down those coins and took out more and more of the gold and decreased the gold content of those coins. In the 14th century in Europe, Africans at that time would trade colorful beads for crops as well as livestock and other goods and services that they had. When the Europeans landed and figured that out, they brought loads of glass beads over and ended up getting lots of precious materials in exchange for what was to them relatively worthless glass beads that they could mass produce. So they inflated the money supply very easily. When we relied on a gold standard, the world after World War II held most of its gold reserves with the US. And they promised that, if everybody pegged their currency to the US dollar, they could then redeem those dollars for gold. In 1971, President Nixon went back on that promise and said it was no longer redeemable for gold. So they basically cheated everybody out of that promise. So there's another instance where we shouldn't trust central banks and governments entirely. If you look at developing countries around the world, whether it's Turkey, Egypt, Lebanon, look at the inflation that they have because their central banks print way too much currency at the expense of their local populations. Look at Cyprus in 2013, where they closed one of the largest banks in the country and took 10 billion euros of depositors' money in order to pay back debts. They literally confiscated the wealth of the local population in order to pay back national debts. If you look at what happened in Canada when truckers were protesting COVID lockdowns, people's bank accounts were frozen and had their assets seized. If you look at the Russia-Ukraine conflict, whether you agree with what happened or not, Russia had, I think it was like $600 billion worth of assets seized. So there's case after case throughout history of good reasons why you shouldn't entirely trust central banks and governments with your money. But aside from all of those examples, having something where it doesn't rely on trust, like Bitcoin, where you can just transact and get the product and service you want, my trust is based on if I pay X amount of Bitcoin or dollars for a service, I shouldn't have to trust whether the currency is going to be confiscated or here tomorrow or not here tomorrow. It's more based on, did I get the goods and services I expected in return? So a trustless currency is actually a really good thing, and Bitcoin is exactly that. I think the second thing I'd say is just by analogy. I don't know if Yuval is living in a bit of a utopian world here, but we have locks on doors because we know that 99 people out of 100 are really friendly, great people, but you occasionally get one bad actor, one crazy person that will happily walk through your door if it's open and come and steal all of the stuff in your house. So you have protective mechanisms against that. You have a military, at least hopefully, not to go and invade and pillage and steal, although that definitely does happen, but as a defensive mechanism to prevent and stop other nations from being tempted to come and steal from you. You have airbags in your car for the unfortunate situation where another driver, a drunk driver or somebody else makes a mistake or crashes into you. And so Bitcoin is trustless, and that's a really good thing. It doesn't rely on central banks and governments being honest. That is great. It's one less thing to worry about. So I think Yuval has got to spend a little bit more time studying Bitcoin and studying why removing a layer of trust actually eliminates a major problem in the world, and that we can still form trust as humans and as societies and as countries based on trade, not based on is somebody going to manipulate or confiscate the currency. So hope you like that video and let me know what you think.